All right, thank you, Congresswoman. Also a member of Congress, hailing from across the East River, is Congresswoman Yvette Clarke.
Let me thank Attorney Michael Hardy, to all of my colleagues who are present and here on the platform, to the Reverend Al Sharpton in absentia, and to all of my sisters and brothers here at NAN. It is certainly my honor and my privilege to come and to address you as we reflect and we absorb what is a really important day for us, which is that of the celebration and commemoration of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And I think it's important that when we address Dr. King, that we put the Reverend up front.
Thank you.
Because it was his faith in the face of serious adversity, life-threatening adversity, that brought him through, that brought us all through. It was the divine that guided him, that made it such that fear was not an option. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I'd like to thank you for inviting me to be here. And I wanted to share with you that as we gather today in honor of the man, let's also honor the movement.
Yeah.
Let's also honor the movement. There were a lot of unnamed, unrecognized, and unregarded foot soldiers that made and galvanized a movement for our liberation. And we owe it to ourselves in this moment in particular to acknowledge and to absorb that. It's great to be back home in New York because Washington, D.C. is a very toxic place these days. And I'm home to detox. Hello, somebody. It's a privilege to just be able to share with you a few thoughts on, as we honor our country's most iconic civil rights leader. We've gathered here today to be inspired, to be lifted by the life and enduring legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Many of us regard Reverend King as a graduate of Morehouse College, the very distinguished pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, as the distinguished Nobel laureate who won the Nobel Peace Prize for leading the most profoundly influential movement that shocked the conscious and rocked the world. You know, we like to own it because he's one of our own, but he set the wheels in motion for so many other movements around the world of liberation. All of us are direct beneficiaries of the life's work of a man who led a liberation movement, and we finally describe him as the dreamer, the drum major for justice. An outstanding man who devoted his life's work to the disruption and demise of Jim Crow, leading a highly successful battle for the very lives of the marginalized, the oppressed, the abused people from various and all segments of our society, irrespective of race, gender, religion, ethnic background, sexual orientation, and any other form of discrimination used against them. So I have a question for you, sisters and brothers, today. As we gather to commemorate the transformative contributions of Reverend King, I want to know whether you still hear the drum beat. Do you hear the drum beat of the drum major? Like you, I view Reverend Dr. King as a visionary who was so inspired by his faith in God, a faith that guided his leadership and compelled him to tap into a wellspring of courageous audacity that moved the nation and moved the world. He was truly gifted with the power to touch both the minds and hearts of the people and galvanize and unite them under one common goal of freedom for all. Do you feel the drumbeat? And why is that important? 2020. We got the orange man. We got the orange man who is working at every level to strip us of our humanity through every vehicle he has at his disposal. There were those foot soldiers who didn't go on to college, gave up their jobs, risked everything, imprisoned, because they saw the existential threat, they lived the existential threat of Jim Crow every day. Well, guess who's back? Jim Crow's cruel cousin. So I want to ask us today, are we looking for another Martin Luther King Jr.? Are we looking for our elected officials to save us? Or are we prepared to make the sacrifice that our ancestors made so that we could sit in the National Action Network and commemorate their work today? That's the question. And I submit to you that our ancestors will want us to make sure that we are courage in the face of this threat. That nothing they say they do to us could ever make us so fearful that we surrender our human dignity, our human rights, our civil rights, and our civil liberty. So I'm here with a clarion call today. This is serious business, and I know that people here at the National Action Network can feel me. I know that Dr. King was assassinated because they thought they could stop us. They thought they could confound us. That we would run into all different corners and never ever again be organized to fight for our freedom. Well, now is the time, sisters and brothers. Now is the time, if ever there was a time, because when the children and the grandchildren look up at us and say, what did we do when they elected Trump? We need to be able to look them in the face and say, as you can read from this history book, we kicked his ass to the curb. Do I need to repeat myself? That was Brooklyn in the house. Hello, somebody. That was Brooklyn in the house. We're going to go out and vote. We're going to take everyone we know out to vote. We're going to stand in line. If it's uncomfortable, we're going to bring out some chairs. We're going to do everything we need to do. And while we're doing that, we're going to fill out the census.
Right.
We're going to fill out the census for the newborn in the building. We're going to fill out the census for Granny in the nursing home. We're going to fill out the census for everybody in between. And if you think the baby going to come on census day, sign them up. It's all about how much can I make them fear their futures. That is what Donald Trump and his enablers are pushing. But we need to be able to say we come from a courageous people. People who give their lives, people who give their blood, people who give their everything so that we can sit here today. I'm going to close with this. I had the distinct honor and privilege of traveling with Speaker Nancy Pelosi to the continent of Africa last summer. We were invited by the president of Ghana in the year of return. It was an extraordinary. I wish I could have taken you all with me. You need to be able to tap in and understand that 400 years ago, when the first African was kidnapped, brutalized, and brought to be enslaved in the Western Hemisphere, they had no idea of what life would mean at the end. They didn't know whether they could live their lives. We went to the castles, that's what they call them, but they're really dungeons where they held us, brutalized us, raped us, abused us. There was a trail that they just grabbed sisters and brothers from across the continent to ship them out to the New World. But one of our tour guides was a sister from the United States. And through all that pain of going into those dungeons, you know, the smell of death, the stench is still there. Yeah. You can still smell it. It was a spiritual awakening as well. The pain was there, but I realized, you know, my parents were born in Jamaica. I was born in Brooklyn. That was the triangle. I needed to be back home to see where it all originated. And then there was a sense of empowerment and victory. Because that sister's t-shirt read something. And it read, "We are our ancestors' wildest dreams." So the next time Donald Trump gets on his Twitter page, you let him know you don't live in episodes. You are part of an epic, and we are going to be victorious. God bless you. God strengthen you in the days ahead.
All right, thank you, Councilwoman. Well, you know, Reverend Sharpton said, you never know when you're going to need a little justice. You never know when you're going to need a little mercy. So if there's a prosecutor in the room, you got to have him up. We're pleased to have the Kings County District Attorney, Eric Gonzalez.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be back at the House of Justice. I want to thank Ned. I want to thank Reverend Al Sharpton for giving me an opportunity to say hello and share some thoughts on Martin Luther King Jr. Anniversary. And, you know, every year in January, we have a sacred day, a sacred Monday, to talk about the life and legacy of Dr. King. And we remember him largely for what he did to fight Jim Crow down in the American South. But his life, the lessons we learned, his fight is just as relevant today as it was back then. And we have to talk about it, and we have to do this. And so, as the District Attorney of Brooklyn, I'm vowing to stand with my community to make it safe, but I'm also there to make sure that our justice system is fair and just for everyone. And that's regardless of race, religion, sexual orientation, or how much money someone got in their pocket, right? Like, let's be real about this. That is the biggest factor in our justice system. If you are poor, you don't get fairness, and you don't get justice. And the challenges that confront us today may look different than the fight that Dr. King had back then. But I want to be clear with everyone in this room today. Today, if you're an African-American boy, if you're a black boy or teenager, you're still 14 times more likely to be killed by gunfire in this country. If you're a young man of color, you're still more likely to be arrested. Mass incarceration is not a fake thing, it's a real thing. And it affects every aspect of the justice system, from who gets arrested, to who gets prosecuted, to who gets convicted, and to the length of that sentence, right? That is as unacceptable in 2020 as segregated lunch counters were in 1960. And in Brooklyn, and I'm talking about Brooklyn, I'm working tirelessly with my team to make our justice system fairer and safer for everyone. Now, we've been hearing a lot of talk about bail reform, and there's a lot of fear-mongering that goes on with that, that new change in the law. In Brooklyn, we implemented bail reform over a year ago. And I am something that you can point to, because in Brooklyn there are over 60,000 people arrested on misdemeanors. Judges in Brooklyn only set bail on 3.5% of that 60,000 people. It's proof that we don't need to set bail on every case to be kept safe. We've also done other things in Brooklyn that are leading the way in fundamental fairness. You see, I've made a decision that a lot of cases don't need to be in the system, so we decline to prosecute a lot of cases, and we divert cases out the system. People with mental health histories, people that have addiction problems, people that have other social service needs, that get arrested because of health issues, what are basically health problems, don't belong in Rikers, and they don't belong in our justice system. I don't need to take someone who's been involved in drug use, have them arrested, spend the night in central booking, go to court, get a lawyer hired, a lawyer appointed, go before a judge, plead not guilty, do all of this to get them treatment. So in Brooklyn, we go right to the precinct. When someone gets arrested 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, not just for opioids, for all drugs, or people who are using drugs and are addicted, we have peer counselors go to the precinct and say to them, the DA doesn't want to prosecute you, but we want to get you services. Are you willing to come with us and get services? And our police department has agreed to do that with us. In the first year in its operation, we've reached out to over 800 people in Brooklyn who would otherwise have criminal records or go through the system, and over 500 of them have successfully completed drug treatment. Now, I say this, right? I believe in reform of our justice system. I also believe in safety. And let's talk about what the record really is in the County of Kings in Brooklyn, New York. Because if you listen to the news, you would think that it's out of control in the county, that crime is spiraling out of control. In 2015, when my predecessor, the late great district attorney Ken Thompson, let's give it up for Ken. He made a difference. Let's give it up for Ken Thompson. When Ken put me on to be his chief assistant, meaning I was the number 2 person in the office, when he gave me that position, that year we had 146 people murdered in Brooklyn. And we celebrated that number back then because it was so much less than we had in prior years. See, I grew up in East New York, 7-5 precinct. When I was applying to be a DA back in the late 90s, there were 126 people just murdered in my neighborhood in the 7-5 precinct. Right? It was called the murder capital of New York City back then. So we celebrated 146 dead people in 1995. I'm sorry, in 2015. We celebrated that as a great accomplishment. Since I've been the DA in 2016, after the passing of Ken Thompson, do you know that last year we ended with the fewest number of homicides in Brooklyn? Right? That's impressive. But we've reduced the number of people who have been murdered on our streets by a full third. By a full third. And let's be clear about this. Those lives that were saved were Black and Latino lives in Brooklyn. Why I'm telling you this is not just to celebrate the great work that we've done with the police to make sure that violent crime goes down, because shootings were also at a record low in Brooklyn last year. In spite of what you've heard, we had fewer shootings than ever before, the lowest in my lifetime. But besides that, it's because there's pushback. You all hear it, that you can't actually have fundamental fairness and safety at the same time. And there are people urging all of you to join the chorus of retreat, to say that we need tougher enforcement to be safe. We need smarter enforcement for sure. We don't need tougher enforcement. That rhetoric has been been spoken often, and we've heard, the former mayor now apologize for a stop and frisk. It's not enough. It's not enough. There have been communities that have been completely destabilized and hurt by those policies. We can't ever move back. We're not going to move back towards high crime, but we're not going to move back to failed policies. And so we have to move forward. And so while our criminal justice reforms may not be perfect, they may need to be looked at and examined and massaged over time. They're a positive step forward. We should celebrate them. We should be proud, because those reforms will lead to fairness, and we can do it in ways that keep our communities safe. We can do that. I also want to say this. I am completely committed to public safety. I've only began to talk about this more recently in my life. I had a brother who lost his life to gun violence, so gun violence means a lot to me. But I know that we can do this in ways that actually promote safety. Safety and fairness go hand in hand. Dr. King understood that. He also said that wait almost always meant never. If we don't seize the opportunity to make the reforms that we need now, they may never come. We have to seize on these opportunities today. I'm committed as the DA to make sure that we don't wait, that we're not deterred in our pursuit of justice for our families. We'll keep our community safe. And listen, I believe this. Our safety has to be anchored in fairness if we're going to move forward. God bless each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. District Attorney. You see this assembly person around, and he's always patient, he's always quiet, but he's enormously substantive, and it's a pleasure to have him with us, Assemblyman Richard Godfrey.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I chair the Health Committee in the New York State Assembly. So you can imagine what is the favorite quote of Dr. King for me. That of all the forms of injustice, the greatest equality, the inequality in health, is the most shocking and inhuman because it leads to death. And here in New York, millions of New Yorkers who have health coverage, let alone the uninsured, millions of New Yorkers who have health coverage go without health care because they can't afford it or suffer real financial hardship in order to get it. It does not have to be that way. We can change this. I'm not going to give you a whole agenda. If you go to my page on the Assembly website, you'll find more stuff than you want to read. But it doesn't have to be this way. Someone else who was murdered in 1968, Robert Kennedy, said that the future is not a gift. It is an achievement. And working together, we can end that injustice and inequality and the horrendous, shocking inhumanity so that more of our people can live. That's our mission. Thank you.
All right, she represents District 55 across the river in the Republic of Brooklyn, the Honorable Patrice Walker.
Well, y'all got your seatbelts on. Let me please say how honored I am to be here because of course we have heard a lot about some groundbreaking legislation that we worked on in Albany. But some of the tenets of criminal justice reform that we've done has been under severe attack. And we're all looking for the civil rights issue of our time. But representing Brownsville, East New York, Crown Heights, Bed-Stuy, East Flatbush, I stand here to tell you that criminal justice reform is one of those civil rights issues of our time. But of course, we're here on MLK Day representing and supporting and honoring the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was, as we heard, a preacher. And one of the things that I want to speak about, which resonates for me, people go to a lot of different scriptures, but in Genesis 37, it says, "There goes that dreamer. Let's kill him and see what becomes of his dream." And I think today we saw a representation of a great dreamer that they thought in Genesis that they were talking about Joseph, but they were still talking about our Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we are a true representation and the embodiment of his dream. And I am proud and I am honored to stand in this particular role. But another thing that I'm very much well aware of is the Constitution. And now the Constitution tells us that slavery was abolished except in the case of criminal punishment. So that means that the very piece of paper, the very doctrine that separates me from what I've read about, what I've heard about, what my ancestors have told me about, what roots have shown me, is criminal punishment. So that tells me that each and every time someone is subjected to the criminal justice system, they instantaneously becomes a slave, right? And we know that slavery was a peculiar institution which was based on economics. But bail is also in the Constitution, and it dictates that bail should not be cruel and it shouldn't be unusual punishment. In fact, it shouldn't be punishment at all. But they will tell you, you're going to hear people, we heard about the fear mongering. They're going to tell you that bail makes us unsafe. They will tell you that they want to institute this doctrine called dangerousness. Not only are they telling us about this element of dangerousness, we heard about the sons and the cousins and everybody else of Jim Crow, but they're also utilizing our leaders to convince us that dangerousness is a good idea. So people, they say, okay, well, Latrice, you're from Brownsville. So they go, oh, because I'm from Brownsville, they know you're going to be a fighter. There are certain preconceived notions that we have about people from certain communities and certain areas. And those same preconceived notions stand in the halls of justice when they have to deliberate over us. So when they are allowed to utilize this vehicle of dangerousness, who are they going to preclude is dangerous? So all I'm asking for is that we have heard that this is a movement, this is not a moment, that we utilize this movement to start to tweet, to start to get on the airwaves, make sure that we are in all of the social media forums to state that we will not roll back bail reform. Because it's too important. If it doesn't mean anything to you, let me tell you about this young man who came into my office. He worked for the Salvation Army. He had a 7-month-old son. But he needed to turn himself into the police department, and he did. I love you. I'm gonna premise this way. I love you to death. He left. Okay. When he was subjected through the justice system, they put bail on him, and we have something called charitable bail, right? And charitable bail is something that gets instituted. If you're charged with a misdemeanor, this fund will pay your bail. So that whole thing what you're doing, who's gonna put up what, who's gonna put up what house, who's gonna do, we don't have to go there. So we sent charitable bail down to Kings County Court to pay the bail, and that was done. But they put a $1 hold on this young man. So I instantly got on the telephone and I said, okay, speaking to his sister, can you run downtown to pay this $1 hold? You know what she told me? She didn't have a car fare.
Right.
So again, bail is not about safety. It is not about protecting the public. It is about pre-trial incarceration of poverty.
Right.
Now, I just want to make one last thing extremely clear. Under this new law, judges can require mental health or substance use treatment. They can set restrictions on the release with non-monetary measures such as home detention, curfews, seizing of passports, and/or electronic monitoring. Further, cash bail is still eligible in many instances, including sexual assault, domestic violence, or if you have had a conviction within the last 5 years. So they're going to tell you that, oh, this new bill, it's just letting all sorts of elements back into the community, fear-mongering, because we know that this peculiar institution, which stands in the gap for slavery as we know it, in this newest form and newest element, is again under attack. And we know that they told us that they want to take America back. We clearly understand, we got the memo, we know what they want to take America back to. A place where the freedoms that we enjoy, that we no longer have those freedoms. So this is just a fight for freedom, and we know that freedom is not free, right? But in the honorable words of Dr. King, I say I am supportive of bail, I am supportive of criminal justice reform, and I want to let all of the fear-mongers know we are free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. God bless you.
All right. Coming up next, they represent the North Shore. Now you may be thinking, well, where's that? Well, he represents the county of Richmond. And some of you may say, well, where's that? It is Staten Island, and there's a lot about Staten Island that you may not know, and Assemblyman Charles Fall from the 61st District is going to tell us.
Good afternoon. You know, so I want to just quickly say that I bring greetings from the South. Of course, that is Staten Island, and if you are looking for a place to vacation, you don't need a visa. We don't accept visas on Staten Island, so you can more than welcome and come over there. So I'm really honored to be here to celebrate Dr. King's Day here in the House of Justice, and I also really want to thank Reverend Al Sharpton for his leadership in ensuring that the legacy of Dr. King is continued every Saturday, right, in the House of Justice. Let's please clap to that. I also strongly feel that if it wasn't for Dr. King's advocacy and him paying the ultimate sacrifice, my parents would not have had the opportunities to solve people problems. My parents would not have the opportunity that they had to live the American dream. My mom came here working as in Burger King, now she's a CFO in the bank. My father worked as a cab driver, now a small business owner. And I am the first black man to ever be elected in Staten Island history. And that wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for Dr. King paving the way for people like me. There is a lot of work to do, but when I had a conversation with my 6-year-old daughter, Maimuna, about, what did she learn in school about Dr. King Day? And at first she was like, I didn't learn anything, she was playing these little games. But then I was like, okay, well I'm gonna ask your teacher. And then she started, telling me about Dr. King. And just that conversation alone makes me feel that there is some progress. But although there is some progress, there still is a lot of work to do. And I am really honored that I am working with incredible colleagues behind me and Speaker Carl Hasty to ensure that we in the state legislature do a lot of amazing things to ensure that New York City is up to date, especially when it comes to our laws. So again, I wish everybody a happy MLK Day, and also continue to remember that it's important that this is a day of service and not a day off. Thank you and God bless.
Look at that. He ain't short, but it certainly was sweet. But he was, anyway. That's right. All right, Assemblywoman Catherine Nolan from the 37th District, who also has been enormously patient with us today.
So usually when I come, I'll say that I don't like to visit the village of Harlem without bringing the town of Queensbridge with me, because I represent Long Island City. But today, because it's a special day, I did one better, and I brought someone from Albany with me, and that's my wonderful legislative director, Brittany Stinson, whose first time here. Stand up, Brittany, get a little credit. This wonderful young woman runs our legislative program up there from when I chaired education and has been a real star. And last year, with her work and the work of so many here in the city, we were able to finally pass a bill that brought collective bargaining rights to farm workers. With the leadership of Andrea Stewart-Cousins and Carl Hasty, after 20 years of trying to get the people who work and pick the apples and the onions that we eat and the food that we eat, the rights that they had been denied since the 30s when they were specifically left out of our state and then our federal laws. So it's a pleasure to work with all of you and be part of that. I also want to say one reason it was important for younger people and for Brittany to be here today with me is that the bill we're working on now with my longtime colleague, Senator Velman of Montgomery, has been something near and dear to Assemblywoman Walker and other colleagues' hearts, which is a bill that would require restorative justice statewide. What happens in the city schools is very different than what happens in schools throughout our state. And so working with the Alliance for Quality Education and other groups, Velmanet and I have what may be our final bills because she's going to be retiring, but we've had a long career together of supporting bills that will move things forward. And that's really why I'm here today, to pay honor to all of you for being activists, to thank you for the support you've given me over so very many years, and just to reflect, because today is a day of reflection very quickly with so many speakers. I was elected a long time ago, and I got the support. A lot of people took a chance on me. I was a young woman. And a woman named Lillian Brown was a civil rights leader at Queensbridge Houses. She had been a young woman who helped integrate, was hired by Woolworths as one of the group from Abyssinian that was hired way back at that time. And shortly after I got elected, when Dr. Sharpton was talking about different causes he's been involved in, a young man named Richard Luke was killed in police custody at Queensbridge Houses after his mother had called for some help because he was under the influence of drugs and was not himself. And it was a thing. It was a thing. And when you're elected in politics, there's always a smart person, so-called smart person, to tell you what to do. So a number of people had said, I had intended to go to the funeral. She's a very new assemblywoman. A number of people had said to me, you better not do that, because that's not something that other powerful people, whether the police, the prosecutors, who know who it was, that will not go over well for you, will hurt you in your re-election. And when you're new, you want to get re-elected. But after a lot of discussion with Lillian and my father, who had grown up in Queensbridge, I decided it was too egregious what had happened to Richard Luke, and that I had to be there. Because it's better to risk it and go forward proud than be craven and political. So when I got there, that was the first time I ever heard Reverend Sharpton speak. And myself and then now Bishop Mitchell Taylor, that's how we first met. So you know, when you do something in life, it was a very sad service up at Astoria Reformed Church, packed service, very sad service. When you do something and you're new and it makes that impression on you, it's unforgettable. And so many of us were inspired at that time by Reverend Sharpton's remarks to sort of double down into what was happening at Queensbridge at that time. And our community center was not functioning, and I don't want to get into all of it, it's too busy a day here, but suffice it to say that Bishop Taylor and I have worked for over 30 years to bring improvements to Jacob Reese, really because of that very sad and defining moment. So you never know in life, to the young people here, what will be the thing that points you in the right direction. And I often think about that. If I had stayed back and not gone, you know, because, well, politically it seemed risky, I would never have had that opportunity to open myself up, to learn what was happening in our Queensbridge community, and to recognize that an injustice had occurred. And it was an eye-opener for me, and something I never forgot, and I've been part of this movement for a very long time. I also want to say, Reverend Sharpton, we were very young then, we were about the same age, and he was on fire that day. And it was quite a thing to see, and to realize that there was someone coming from outside Long Island City, coming into Long Island City, who was going to support those of us who were there, myself and Mitchell Taylor. It was the first time I heard him preach, too. It was a day I'll never forget. So a sad day, but a day that helped form in me the commitment to my community. So I want to thank so many here at National Action Network who've worked with us to bring those improvements, and to have been, in my own way, played a small part in it. So on King Day, we reflect and we remember people like Richard Luke, who did not get a chance to live his life as perhaps he should have because of drugs and the abuse, and whatever happened that day in the precinct was never, ever, ever really, unfortunately, never really explained. There was a holding cell that was, I will say, we got that closed. You know, these are the small, maybe they're small, but they're not, because we made a difference. So thank you, Nan, for all your support, and thank you, Dr. Sharpton, for everything. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was. Yes. All right.
We were younger then.
We were, yeah. You know, one of the things, very quickly, we do at National Action Network is we have a monthly legal night. You know, we took off November and December, and we come back the last Thursday, and it's the last Thursday of every month. And many of you saw here earlier Donna Lieberman, the head of the NYCLU, and the Honorable Judge Littman, who was the former Chief Judge of the State of New York, both of whom are regular contributors to Legal Night. I'm also happy to see with us the president of the Federal Bar Association for the Southern District of New York, and a founder of the Legal Night, Wiley Stecklow, in the audience and with us. Thank you. All right, Assemblywoman Joanne Simon from the 52nd District.
A lot shorter than Charles Fall. So, thank you. Let me just say, before I begin, that I want to thank the sign language interpreters, because, you know, they've been working here all day long, and nobody actually notices them sometimes. So I want to just give a round of applause for this interpreters. I am a woman with a checkered past. I started off as a teacher of the deaf, and I became a sign language interpreter for some time, and I did some other things too, practiced law, worked on Wall Street, and now I'm in the Assembly. But I always remember very fondly, and is still a very strong part of my life. It is one of those things where you do something and it opens up a new world to you, and certainly going to graduate school at Gallaudet University and learning sign language and becoming part of the deaf community was really something that has been a really formative thing for me. As you can tell, I have a cold, so I'm not going to take too long. I did write out some comments. I was told I had 4 minutes that I could speak. And so I wrote out some comments. And then at one point I was Googling something, and I came upon John F. Kennedy's inaugural address. And I noticed that the word count for his inaugural address was only 50 words longer than my address today. So obviously, it's way more than 4 minutes. So I'm not going to speak about in any great length. But I do want to talk about a couple of things that are really important to me, and I believe are really important to, and should be important to all of us. Obviously, with the age of women's rights, we had the Women's March just yesterday, and there have been a lot of comments and a lot of articles written about whether Me Too has gone too far. I don't believe that Me Too has gone too far. I don't think it's gone far enough. And similarly, today we are hearing about bail reform and whether it's gone too far. And it has not gone far enough. So the Assembly, and certainly I am going to be there, standing up for people. We know that this was, bail and our other criminal justice reforms were desperately needed, and we are not going back. And I want to assure everybody here that we in the State Assembly and I will be fighting to keep progress happening instead of regression. Thank you, NYCHA, yes. Well, a lot of problems with NYCHA, as you know. I have a number of programs and NYCHA developments in my district as well that I work with very closely, and it's something that we have to keep finding a way to fund NYCHA and to advocate for NYCHA. I want to also raise an issue that, of course, as a former special educator, is important to me, and that is our children. Our children in education, throughout their education. And so there are a couple of things I want to say. Number one, we need to repeal the SHSAT, repeal Hector Calandra. This is an effort I've been working on very hard in the Assembly. And the other thing is, of course, the campaign for fiscal equity and fully funding our schools. Thank you. One of the reasons that's so important is so many of our kids are shortchanged. And one of the issues that I have been working on greatly is making sure that our teachers are actually taught how to teach reading, and that we are identifying our kids who have reading disabilities, because you can be poor, you can be from a broken family, a family of divorce, you can be homeless, you can be well-heeled, and you can be dyslexic. And we are missing kids with reading and learning disabilities because we're not paying attention, or because we attribute their problems to something else, right? And no place is that seen more than in our prison system, where easily between 65 and 75% of people who are incarcerated have difficulty reading. And when I was visiting a prison just last month, I talked to one of the men there about this, and he said he'd never been picked up, but he couldn't read, and he was struggling to read, and so many of the people that were serving time with him had trouble reading. So one of the bills I want to call your attention to and ask for your support for is a bill that is modeled on part of the First Step Act, and that is that anybody who comes into our criminal justice system who does not have a high school diploma will be immediately screened for the presence of reading disability and provided with services that they need to learn how to read. There is no better way for people to re-enter and to be able to read, take their proper role in life and earn a living. So I want to encourage you. My Senate's co-sponsor is Senator Zellner Myrie. We're working very hard to try and get that passed this year, and I'm really hoping to have support from the community for this bill, because I think it will make such a difference to everyone. So I want to thank you for your attention. Thank you for listening to me with this terrible voice. I want to thank Nan and Dr. Sharpton and Michael Hardy, and to all of you for coming out today and making this really a day of service and a day of action. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. All right, David Weprin represents the 24th District. He is someone that has been on the field for a long time, and family has a lot of history, and they say the arc of the universe bends towards justice, so he's helped bend that arc. Let's welcome him.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Reverend Al Sharpton, for your constant leadership, especially on a day like today, when we remember the great Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. I chair the Corrections Committee in the Assembly. And you hear all this stuff about changing bail reform. And thanks to my leader in the Assembly, who you heard from earlier, Speaker Carl Hastie, we're not rolling anything back. We're going to be expanding. What we really need is alternatives to incarceration, and I've been fighting for that. One of my bills I have in Albany also is to expand educational programs for incarcerated individuals, and I have a bill, You heard of work release? I have a bill for educational release, where incarcerated individuals can leave their incarceration and attend college in a college setting. So that is going to be one of my major priorities this coming session. And we all have to work together on so many different issues. But we can't lose sight that it takes teamwork to make the dream work. God bless you all. Thank you.
All right. I want to also welcome New York State Senator Brad Parliament.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. I'm State Senator Brad Hoylman. I represent Chelsea, the West Village, Upper West Side, Midtown East, Peter Cooper, Stuyvesant Town. You know, I'm so proud to be here among my colleagues, particularly those strong black women, because I work for a strong black woman. Her name is Andrea Stewart-Cousins. And let me tell you, the Senate has transformed under her leadership. The Democrats, for the first time, control the New York State Senate in the better part of 100 years. 100 years. But last year, thanks to the efforts of so many people here and across the state of New York, we elected the first Colombian American senator, actually 2 of them. We elected the first Iranian American senator. We elected the first Salvadoran American senator. We elected the first Muslim American senator. We elected the first Southeast Asian American senator. We elected the first Taiwanese American senator. We elected the most Latinas in the history of the New York State Senate, the most women in the history of the New York State Senate, and of course, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, the first woman and the first African-American woman ever to lead a legislative chamber in Albany. And friends, I gotta tell you, it's this strength of diversity that has enabled us to pass so many great laws this session. We talk about criminal justice reform. We're gonna stay firm on that. We talk about protecting tenants. We're going to do more to protect our sisters and brothers in rent-regulated apartments. We talk about NYCHA. The state of New York has to finally fulfill its promise. And the city too. Absolutely true. And legislation that I sponsor won't allow the city to demolish NYCHA buildings without it going through our local community boards first. At all. And let me say something else. In terms of justice, in terms of opening those doors to justice, allowing those courthouses to be the sanctuaries of justice that we all believe them to be, and that Dr. King fought so and sacrificed his own life to do so. I passed legislation that for the first time will allow adult survivors of child sexual abuse to confront their abuser in a court of law, take them to court, sue them for everything they're worth, and finally have the benefit of equal justice under the law. So I'm very proud of that under our leadership with Andrea Stewart-Cousins at the helm. You know, I represent, as I said, Peter Cooper Stuyvesant Town, and a man there who some of you may have known, maybe grew up with some of you, died last week. His name was Butch Purcell. Butch, 75 years old. They called him the mayor of Stuytown. Much like here, everyone in our district would come to see Butch and to get his wise counsel on issues. So I just want to mention Butch in my remarks. He was a political icon in his own right. He talked about how he was inspired by Dr. King in his own right. And he fought for so many of the things that we're all fighting for in his own right. So thank you so much for everything you do, Nan. Thank you for standing up for our communities. Thank you for giving us the wind at our back as we push forward. Because they're coming for us in Albany. The forces of the status quo, those who want to repeal the progress we've made. But united, we are stronger than they ever could have imagined. So I pledge to you, with our new Senate majority, with senators like Brian Benjamin, Robert Jackson, Zellner Myrie, a couple of names you've heard here today, in addition to Jamal Bailey, who helped pass those incredibly historic reforms, we will fight forward. We will not go backwards. We will make our city, our state, and country the land that Dr. King wanted it to be, that Dr. King believed it to be, that we all are fighting for every day. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. She's one of the hardest working councilwomen in the city of New York, our dear sister, Helen Rosenthal.
Oh my goodness, it's so nice to see you. Are you a little hot? You okay? Need water? Need water? Okay, water should be coming. I want to thank you so much for having me here today on MLK Day. I come here as an ally. You know, when I was a little girl, I asked a rabbi what's the difference between heaven and hell. And this is what he said. Close your eyes. Close your eyes and imagine a place that has so much food, bountiful, nourishing food on the tables. It's all there waiting for you. But you look down and you see there is a spoon, you have a hand, you have an arm, but there are no elbows. And so what can you do? Nothing. And the little girl opens her eyes and says, well, that's hell. The rabbi says, now close your eyes and think about a room full of wonderful, nourishing food on beautiful tables. And you look down, you see the spoon, you see your hand, you see your arm, you still don't have elbows. But what you experience is people serving each other, is people helping each other be fed. And in that way, we have a community, and that is heaven. I'm here as an ally, and I want to tell you, in the City Council, I had an opportunity to stop a corrupt contract at the Department of Education that was about to be signed for $1.1 billion. It would have gone to a single provider who happens to have his business out in Long Island. And we were able to get that contract negotiated down to $800 million. The Department of Education signed it. I walked into de Blasio's office the next day and said, hell no. Hell no, that isn't a corrupt contract, especially because you could negotiate it down $300 million. You have to rebid it. And you know what he did? In the history of the Department of Education and City Hall, this was the first time ever City Hall said to DOE, negate the contract, rewrite the RFP, and rebid it out. They did, and guess what? It came back with a total cost of $475 million. And it went to not one bidder, but over a dozen, many of which were minority and women-owned businesses, just who we want to lift up. I come here as an ally. Guess how that money was spent that year, that $600 million in savings? It was spent on universal pre-K for over 65,000 children. I want to thank Michael Hardy, who works every day to help people with his legal clinic to make sure that people stay in their homes. I want to thank Derek Perkinson, who just left the room, and is an amazing organizer pulling everyone together. Yes. And before I thank the Reverend Al Sharpton, I just want to say that Reverend Martin Luther King said that the budget is a moral document. Why is that? It's because when you look at a budget and you don't look at the details, you can't see whether or not the money is going to the people who need and deserve it the most. That $1.1 billion contract was irresponsible. It was irresponsible. Our budget is a moral document. If you want to know whether or not we're spending the money for the people who need and deserve it the most, you got to look inside that budget and you got to see what's going on. I want to thank Reverend Al Sharpton because he carries that responsibility to make sure everyone can walk with dignity and respect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Well, those of you that know me know that I always go left first. So I'm gonna, as we come and wrap up, I'm gonna go left and come back to my right, and let's have and give a welcome to Assembly Person Natalia Fernandez.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Natalia Fernandez, raining down from the Boogie Down Bronx, representing the greatest 8th Assembly District, covering Morris Park, Pelham Parkway, Allerton, Moshalou Parkway, Norwood, and Pelham Gardens. But I'm just going to take a moment to take this in because this is a very special moment for me. I've been an elected official for about a little more than a year and a half. I ran in an earlier election in 2018, right before the September 18 primaries, where we got the first Muslim senator, the first South Asian senator. But in April of 2018, you also got the first Colombian in this state assembly. But yeah, this is my first time here speaking at NAN, so this is very special to me. I come to the dais for a number of years, but time constraints always had me running out the door, but I'm happy that I stayed and I waited because 2020, this is a monumental year just because it's 2020, we're back in the roaring 20s, but we will not go back to how times were there. And that's something that I've heard all of us emphasize today, that we cannot afford to look back for a second, to put anything that we've been putting forward and fighting for and succeeding in, to reverse it in any sort of way. Martin Luther King Day, we know is a day to reflect, remember Dr. King and his word and his legacy that we put forward, but also to re-energize. That's how I see it. I re-energize myself going to services every year and listening to the word again, listening to everybody's inspiration, the experiences from the last year and 10 years prior, and creating a vision for what we need to do today, tomorrow, and 10 years in the future. And as a young legislator, that's what I tell myself. I have been blessed to be elected as your state assembly member, and I make it a personal effort to really try to put myself in a position that will help somebody, because I am somebody that can help someone else just by standing here. I'm a young Latina with curly hair. My teachers told me once upon a time that I should straighten my hair if I ever wanted to be taken seriously. Yeah, so when the Crown Act passed, I was hella happy. But I know that my role here is important, and however much time I have in the state assembly, to fight for what is right and to keep pushing and educating the public that wants to disagree, that wants to scare us, that wants to take away every advancement that we've been able to achieve, and to say no and to keep standing strong. And with my colleagues, I know that's possible because we've come this far. So, like myself, I am going to keep it short and sweet. But thank you so much to everyone that's here today, to the Reverend, to our speakers, to Derek, and to everyone at NAN. Thank you for being that weekly inspiration, daily inspiration that we will succeed. We have so much more far to go, but we will do it. Thank you.
All right. Also from New York City Council in the Boogie Down Bronx, our dear sister Vanessa Gibson.
Good afternoon, everyone. To God be
be in the House of Justice just one more day, I give honor to God, who is truly the head of my life. Before I ask him for anything, I thank him for everything, because God has been good. We are called to this space, to this time, to reflect, to remember, and to celebrate the great legacy of the late, great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I am honored and privileged to stand before you, to all of my colleagues in government who are here at every level of government, to the great leader in Reverend Al Sharpton and the National Action Network. And I have to give a special plug to the Bronx chapter of the National Action Network for all of the work you do. Thank you so much for all of the great work, to Derek, to Rachel, to Ashley, to Dominique, and to all of the Nan family. Thank you so much for always bringing us together. We are reminded of the legacy of the late, great Dr. King. While they may have assassinated the dreamer, they didn't kill the dream. The dream lives on in each and every one of us. We have to stand firm in our purpose. We have to recognize that God is using all of us in a profound way to make a difference, to be the difference that our community desperately needs. Remember, Dr. King was a leader, a teacher, and a preacher. He intersected faith and social justice. Today, we intersect faith and social justice because we recognize that we have to rise for justice for our children, our families, our elders, our LGBT brothers and sisters. We have to stand together. Just a few weeks ago, Reverend Al convened many African-American elected officials and members of the clergy. We were right here on this stage holding a press conference with the rise of anti-Semitism that was happening in the Jewish community. Because sometimes folks think that we only fight for ourselves, that when we see injustice in the black and brown community, that's when we work. But how many of you know if you attack one of us, you attack all of us? And I appreciate Reverend Al for standing up, because a lot of times they don't think we'll stand up for our Jewish brothers and sisters. But yes, we will, and yes, we did, and we always will. We stand up for each and every one of us, because we have to be about our Father's business. We have to understand that Dr. King, on his last hours, stood with sanitation workers at the Lorraine Hotel. 2020, we stand with sanitation workers and teachers and school crossing guards and educators and social workers and entrepreneurs and small business owners. We stand for everyone, because if we don't stand together, united, then we will sink together. We have to stand for something, or we will fall for anything. What is going to be our purpose in life? Dr. King knew his purpose, and God called him to serve for such a time as that. But now we have been called for such a time as this. We are only here, family, in this world called life, for a time, a reason, and a season. What is your reason? What is your season? What are you going to do with this season of your life to give back to someone else? To take a young person by the hand and say, we will help you. We're going to love on you, young people, because we know mass incarceration is real. The pipeline to prison is real. We're going to allow you, young person, to be a success story and not a statistic, because society will already deem our young people failures. But how many of you know you got to shake things up? You got to break these systems. In the words of my sister Tasha Carr, you got to break those chains. Break those chains of injustice, of inequity. Stand up, community. We need you like never before. And understand, you could be elected, a public official, appointed official, whatever title you have, we are all children of God. You don't have to be an elected official to care about your community. We need all of you to stand up. We can no longer allow the destruction that is happening in our communities to define who we are. But we define who we are. It is our character and the content of who we are and not the color of our skin. And I say that as a proud African-American woman standing on Dr. King's shoulders and my sisters Tish James, Andrea Stewart Cousins, and Darcel Clark. They are my role models. Whenever I think I will fail, I can look and see myself in these young women. Our young people need to see us. You can't be what you can't see. Our young people need to see the work that we are doing every single day. So while we are given one day this national recognition on Dr. King's Day, how many of you understand we live out that dream every single day? By doing something in our community, by helping our young people, uplifting our families, that's how you live out his dream, so his dream will never die. So I call all of you, people of God, recommit yourselves to doing something different, to being about your Father's business, and understand that we are all in this together. God bless you, Nan. Thank you all for the work that you do. Thank you so much, and may Dr. King's legacy live on for generations to come. God bless you all.
All right, staying with the New York City Council, our council member Brad Lander.
Thanks very much. Let's hear it from Michael for this act of stamina and staying up here through all these speakers. Thank you, Michael and Derek and Reverend Sharpton. I want to say a special thank you to my colleague Vanessa Gibson from the City Council. In these recent weeks, and I'm speaking now as a Jewish New Yorker, in these recent weeks with anti-Semitic hate crimes on the rise, what it has meant to see African-American sisters and brothers stepping up and standing with us against anti-Semitism. It has meant a whole lot, so thank you, Reverend Sharpton and Vanessa, for that. I'm New York City Council member Brad Lander, and I'm so grateful to observe Martin Luther King Day and National Action Network, because I know that when I come here, I will not hear a sugar-coated version of Dr. King. It's easy, and you understand why it's tempting for people to sugarcoat Dr. King's legacy. You want that beautiful vision of the dream where people are judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. But then people forget the Dr. King that shined a mirror on the society that we actually have, and how far we are from that, and why we're so far from it. And look, I understand this because Dr. King had some things to say to northern white liberals. And I'm standing in front of you today as a northern white liberal, and lots of others have come across that stage. So we got to reach down and hear that Dr. King that said, it may be easy when you have not felt the sting of segregation to say, wait. And we have to dig down and hear the Dr. King that said, in the end, what we'll remember is not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. That was Dr. King speaking some hard words of truth to northern white liberals like me, that it is important not to sugarcoat, and that I know National Action Network will shine the light on, because you might think 52 years after he died that we would have made more progress. But if you stand in New York City and you look around at the most segregated school system in the country that still denies African American kids the education they deserve, or if you look at a set of housing policies in our city that continue to strip wealth from black families, segregate our city, and deny equal opportunity to our families, or if you look at a criminal justice system, even with the great progress that was made last year in Albany, that continues to incarcerate African American and Latino young men at rates far beyond what my son and his kids are, then you know that 52 years later, we are still asking people to wait. So I like coming up here, and it's critical on this day, on Dr. King's holiday, for us to pay attention as he saw between the gap between those self-evident truths that we hold, that everybody's equal, that everybody's got rights given by God, and that the point of government is to secure them, those self-evident truths, and the self-evident realities that we have right here in New York City, that we don't treat everybody as equal, that we have not secured equal rights, and that too often government not only is not the vehicle for equality, but it participates in making things worse. So that's the reality that we need to come here today for, and that's why I value celebrating Martin Luther King Day National Action Network, because we are not going to be judged just by what we say here today from this podium. We are going to be judged by what we do tomorrow and the next day and the next day for justice in our schools, for justice in housing, for justice in our communities, for justice in that criminal justice system. So I hope to be able to come back here next year and observe it again with you, knowing that we made some progress, that we did not say wait, and that bright light that Dr. King shined is something that we are really, truly seeing and lifting up together. Thank you for inviting me here today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, here we go. You know, they say patience is a virtue, and so we are so pleased for the virtue of Assemblyman Felix Ortiz.
This is like playing baseball. They leave the best battle for the last. Let me really thank God for giving me the opportunity to be here with you all and to allow Reverend R. Charlton to give me the opportunity to be here standing on the beautiful day, wonderful day, celebrating Martin Luther King. When I first came to this country in 1980, it is very interesting because I came to this country from Puerto Rico to live in Brooklyn, but my first job was in the Bronx. And then I met Al Charlton in Brooklyn. And I met Al Charlton as a result that I used to live in Brooklyn on 15th Avenue between 38th and 39th Street. And those days, when the landlord wanted you to leave the apartment or they want the apartment to be taken back, they will put fire into some of the empty apartments in the building. I don't know how many of you remember that in the area that we are standing today.
That's right.
But there was this little kid jumping through the window through the fire escape. I had no idea what a fire escape was until my aunt said, we had to jump through the window to go through the fire escape. And I said, what does the fire escape mean? I said, it's a ladder that you have to jump, otherwise you're going to get killed. That is how my welcome ceremony was coming to New York. Wow. So I'm telling my father, I said to my father, something interesting happened in this neighborhood. So I explained to my dad. Now, I forgot to say that when I came here, I couldn't speak English. And I still don't know how to speak English today. That is the reason why they keep me for the last. And usually I tell people my accent is really from the South. And I said that one time in the South, and the guy said to me, you are not from here, young boy. And I said, you're absolutely right, because my accent is from the South of Puerto Rico. And but honestly speaking, I used to live in Georgia. And in 1988, I had a pleasure to meet Madame Luther King, his son and his daughter, by mistake. And the mistake was that I was invited with one of my friends to go to this church for a Martin Luther King Day. And that was so great, and I was so blessed. I never say that was lucky, being lucky. I was blessed to be sitting in the front row. And the person that is sitting next to me happened to be Martin Luther King Jr. III, and his mom and his sister. I had no idea who I'm sitting next to. Until they called their name to come to the podium. Then I called like this to my friend. I said, what are they? I said, those are the family of Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King. My heart went like 300 miles per hour. Okay? After that, I returned back to New York. When I returned back to New York in 1989, I got a job working for the Bronx Borough President office. I went to live in Brooklyn. And at that time, I'm running around the neighborhood in the Bronx, dealing with one issue, and one issue only. The Borough President said to me, go out there and see how you can deal with the homeless crisis. Was a lot of people in Bruckner Boulevard sleeping under that Bruckner Boulevard for years. And the Borough President said to me, if you can clean that and help me to look good, I think you will have a great future ahead of you. And I'm rusting my head and I said, how the hell am I going to do this? Okay, so he gave me the job. But again, being a born Christian, I'm believing in God. So I only had to make one phone call. And that phone call went to my reverend at the Christian church in Brooklyn. And he said to me, son, it's very simple. We need to pray, galvanize people, and people who believe to help you, they will be there for you. And that's exactly what we did. So we put together the health department, we put all the agencies that needed to be part of this, because one of the things that happen when people are homeless, guess what? They don't want to go home. They want to stay where they are. They feel more comfortable. They feel safe. And you need to make sure that we develop a plan. 1989, 1990, David Dinkins got elected. That was a big blessing because I managed to work in his campaign and also I work in his administration. And guess what? I got the green light from the administration to go to get the health department, to get all the agencies, interagencies in place, and we clean up Brooklyn Boulevard in 6 months. 6 months we clean up. People say homeless people. I call them my neighbors people. And the reason I call them my neighbors people, because it's nobody homeless. People want to use the word to make all of us to be homeless. And this is the fight that we have and the challenges that we have ahead of us. You hear about bail reform, right? Well, guess what? I got 1,203 emails. And I tell my staff, let's go and check every single one of those emails. Well, what happened is when people begin to see that now the power has shifted and the power has been moved in a different direction, now they feel that the threat is bigger than what they thought. But it's not about threat. It's about ownership. It's about something that was missing, that other people was not able and capable to stand up to, because they saw that that was a controversial if they move forward. But it's not something, nothing such as a controversial. When you do the right thing, my grandma used to say to me, when you do a piece of legislation and you do what is right, and you pissed off so many people, it's because you're moving in the right direction. And feel proud about that. Lastly, I would like to say this. We're talking about gun violence in our neighborhood, in our community. We need to be part of the solution.
Yes.
We just cannot come here and talk. We need to have action. Talk about the action of the past. What do I did yesterday to make today better? What I'm doing today to make tomorrow better. And I will tell you this. We should have insurance liability for every gun owner in this state. Number 2, we should have a GPS be put in every gun from the manufacturer where gun owners who lose their gun will be able to keep track of them. And my third piece of legislation is the one that if you have a gun, your fingerprint will be identified if that gun will be fired. So it's common sense. When you do common sense, then you get threat. I will show you my email that I got from some groups. I don't know their name anymore, but whatever that group is, Autostrek, I would like to say to them, today is Martin Luther King. The celebration, give out to people, serve, think twice tomorrow before you send another threat email. May God bless you and keep the faith.
All right. So brothers and sisters, give yourselves a big hand. And, you know, let me just say this as we closed out. You know, we saw a lot of leaders on this stage today, and they do a lot of good things. But always remember that they couldn't do it without the foot soldiers that make them who they are and carry out a lot of their work. And so that's why you should give yourselves a big hand, because some of us are the foot soldiers that help to make it happen. And lastly, I'll just say this, closing out King Day here at National Action Network. We appreciate you, all of you being here in the House of Justice of National Action Network. And the things that we do sometimes is really just to be able to make sure we can take care of ourselves, our families, people that we love. And so I'll just end, and I have it printed so I don't mess it up, but it's one of the great quotes of Dr. King that doesn't often get said. And what Dr. King said is, "I can see nothing more basic in the life of an individual than to have a job or an income. If people do not have jobs or income, they are deprived of life, they are deprived of liberty, and they're deprived of the pursuit of happiness." Let's keep the fight going. No justice, no peace. And remember one other thing, because again, we saw a lot here today, and I ask you all, you know, don't take for granted Reverend Al Sharpton, and don't take for granted this House of Justice. God bless you, and thank you.
So that is the end of our King Day celebration. Did you enjoy yourself? A lot of you was here since 9:30 in the morning, so I thank you for that. It was well worth it. We are having Nan Youth Huddle tonight. Nan Youth Huddle is going on regularly scheduled programs, 7 o'clock sharp. Oh, mini huddle. Here's the vice president of our youth huddle, Pinnacle Performer.
Hello. Like Derek announced, my name is Pinnacle Garcia. I'm the Vice President of Nan Youth Huddle, and we will be having a mini huddle today in 20 minutes, so if you would like to stay, please stay. It'll only be brief. We'll be watching a movie, and we'll be talking about different topics. So thank you. If you're not staying, please quietly leave. Thank you.
And thank you guys for coming out. I'll see you soon.